Good morning. Good to see you all. In that clip that DP showed, Camp Mystic was one of the hardest hit places in the floods in Texas. There are over 100 people lost their lives. And just for some context for that, they had lost, I think it was 28 of their fellow campers, and they were busing them back kind of by Camp Mystic, the site of kind of ground zero on the Guadalupe River. And then all the girls just kind of spontaneously broke out into song, singing praises to God. And it reminded me of Job when he lost everything, and Job's response was to fall down and to worship God. So it's a reminder that still thousands of years later, people still, and young people, I just want you to kind of gather that in your brain, how inspiring that is, that our young people are falling down and worship to God after losing many of their friends. We've been talking about this cycle of loving your neighbors. It's the second greatest commandment, to love your neighbor as yourself, to get in the lives of our neighbors, to love them, to treat them the way that we would expect to be treated, and to move them to love God, to teach them the gospel of Jesus Christ, and to have people willingly fall in love with God. It's the greatest commandment in all of the scriptures. And then to move one another to serving others. James is super clear about this, that faith without deeds is dead. Our theme this year is becoming the hands and feet of Jesus. And our theme verses are Matthew 25, 37 through 40. Lord, when did we see you hungry and feed you, or thirsty and give you a drink? And when did we see you a stranger and welcome you, or naked and clothe you? And when did we see you sick or in prison and visit you? And the king will answer them, truly I say to you, as you did it to one of the least of these my brothers, you did it to me. So we're going through this year and talking about how we become more like Christ. How do we develop ourselves and develop our faith and get into the mindset of Jesus Christ and to see people the way that Jesus saw people? It sounds easier than it actually is. You know, it almost sounds gimmicky, like, oh, well, yeah, of course, you know, and you slap your WWJD bumper sticker on, you know, what would Jesus do? But it's not that simple, is it? Because life is hard, and we're faced constantly with choices. And it's very difficult when life gets the best of us, and we become very, very busy. And ironically, today's sermon is on kind of the opposite of busyness, and it's being lazy. But the crazy thing is, we're going to talk about how to be productive, how to get rid of the laziness and become productive for the Lord. There's one thing to be busy, it's another thing to be productive. And so we're going to talk about how to maximize our time here on this earth, because it is passing by very quickly. Speaking of laziness, this past week was kind of a mix of laziness. It was our Hinton-Palooza week, so all the family came up. We had, I don't even know, what was the final count? Do you know how many people total? 45? So we kind of overtook everywhere that we went. We went to Wimber Rec, and we literally almost doubled the amount of people there. We walked in, and I think people gasped. We all got in line for the water slide. There were, how many did we have? 26 people, single file, all from our family, lined up to go up the water slide. We have pictures of that, and of course the lifeguards loved it, and they were cheering us on. We did coal tubing in Johnstown. It's the lazy floating down the river, which was really cool. We had 30-some people with that group. And then we rented a boat at Indian Lake. And the boat only holds like 14 max. So you can imagine with 45 people, we had to come up with schedules. And in Pennsylvania, you have to have a boating license. They won't rent a boat unless you have a boating license. So nobody had a license. So I voluntold myself, and I got a license, which meant I was the only one who was able to operate the boat. So for about 22 hours out of 24 that we had the boat, I was in the captain's seat. We did night runs, and then I ended up sleeping. Xander and Cameron and Isaac, the four of us slept on the boat under the canopy. So me and Xander he was in the co-captain's chair, I was in the captain's chair, and we just leaned back and slept. Then Granny showed up for the sunrise cruise, and that was pretty cool. But in the meantime, I got so tired that Xander had to feed me. So I refused to pick up food, and you can see my fingers were like shaped by the steering wheel. And so instead of picking up food, Xander put food into my mouth. So thank you, Xander. And DP, I don't know if you have the picture, but it reminded me of Ecuador. Whenever DP was lazy, I can't see it on my screen, but maybe he can pull it up here. But it reminded me when Isaac had to give DP water because he just was too lazy at that point to lift his hands and drink water. But we're talking about laziness, right? And what do the scriptures say about being a sluggard? Because we don't want to be that. We don't want to be Christians. And I'm not talking about lazy people out there, and like people who don't work at all and they refuse to get a job. I'm not really talking about that so much as kingdom laziness. Because sometimes we don't properly think about that. We don't think in terms of laziness within the kingdom, and we're like, oh, those lazy bums, who are milking our tax money, and people living off of welfare for the people who actually work the system. The majority of people actually need the help, but there are some people who they kind of work the system, and sometimes we're quick to point the finger, and we're like, those lazy people, but then we don't self-reflect and think, okay, are we lazy within God's kingdom? And so there are a couple scriptures, and Cameron read this one for us earlier. Whatever you do, work heartily. I like the ESV. It's kind of a cool translation of this. Work heartily. That means work from the heart. Work with all of your heart and your soul. Work heartily as for the Lord and not for men, knowing that from the Lord you will receive the inheritance as your reward. You are serving the Lord Christ. In other words, when you serve, you're not serving your fellow man. Because sometimes we think like that, right? It's like, this person like constantly bugging me, and or whatever. We get it in our minds that we're serving people. Paul says, no. You are serving the Lord Christ. For the wrongdoer will be paid back for the wrong he has done, and there is no partiality. In other words, God doesn't give favoritism. God says, if you're doing wrong, if you're cheating people, if you're cheating the kingdom system, if you're ripping people off, if you're conning people, God will pay back wrong for wrong, and there is no partiality. He doesn't play favorites. He looks at the deeds that we do or don't do, and God will repay us. And it reminds me a little bit of this guy here. This is Frank Abagnale. Anybody know who this is? There was a movie based off of him. Catch Me If You Can. Leonardo DiCaprio played Frank Abagnale. So he was young. Frank was born in 1948, and from the time he was very young, he started impersonating people, and he found out that, hey, I can live this lavish lifestyle if I just kind of con people. And it's actually easier than you think to con people. So he posed as a Pan Am pilot, and he would ride in the jump seat. So he had the uniform, and somehow he was able to find a legitimate Pan Am uniform. But he learned the lingo, and he talked like a pilot, and he fooled every single pilot. And he would get on the jump seat, and he would take flights all over the world for free. And so that was his ticket, literally, to go around the world and to travel. He impersonated a doctor. He would mentor people, and he would find interns, and he found a way to get on the payroll at hospitals. So he would, impersonate the doctor, and he was very young. I mean, keep in mind, he's a teenager doing this. He impersonated a lawyer and, of course, was able to get on payroll. But he actually went so far as to take his bar exam, and he passed. Never went to law school, never opened a book. Right, Xander? That's the way. Never crack a book open. But he was able to successfully pass his bar exam, which gave him legitimacy as an attorney, and he would practice law, and he did it just for the sake of conning people. And as a side bonus, he would make some extra money. But at the age of 21, he was finally arrested in France. He also forged a lot of checks. He would write huge checks and he would forge them. He amassed tons and tons of money doing this. But at the age of 21, this all caught up to him. He was arrested in France, and he spent prison time in France and Sweden, and he was eventually extradited back to the U.S. and given a very lengthy prison sentence, but in a plea deal that was really sweetened by the FBI. The FBI was like, we want to know how you got away with this, because we see criminal activity all the time, but nothing to this level. So you are kind of a strange thing. You're the best con man that we've ever seen. So the FBI hired him as a consultant, and he's been on the payroll for decades, consulting with FBI, intelligence agencies, police departments all over the United States, and probably really all over the world. And so he's made a life of giving back. And Frank Abagnale expresses remorse for what he did. And he said, that was not a good lifestyle, and he lives with guilt still to this day for what he did, because he took actual people's money, and he said, I'll never be able to repay what I did, because it's just the guilt that I carry will always be with me. But it's really interesting, right? This idea that we can pretend our way through the kingdom, that we can do counterfeit things, that we can ride the coattails of other people. There's all kinds of stuff that we can do within the kingdom. And the Bible is very about staying away from that, about being honest, working hard, and just putting the work in, and rolling up your sleeves and doing the hard thing and doing the work. So here are some Proverbs. Proverbs 6:6 says, go to the ant, O sluggard. Consider her ways and be wise. What do we see about ants? Natalie we have an ant infestation at our house. Probably most of us do, because this time of year, you find ants everywhere. But the other day, Natalie's like, I saw this big, huge cookie crumb, working its way across the floor. And then I had to kind of take a second look, and there was an ant attached to it, and was just like, la, 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 Ants work hard. They never stop. So the proverb says, go to the ant. In other words, learn from the ant. And by the way, they work together, don't they? They link up and they form these chains, and they can pull things uphill. Consider her ways and be wise. Right? Work together and just work. Just put your head down and work. Proverbs 18:9, whoever is slack in his work is a brother to him who destroys. In other words, if you're lazy, if you're slack in the work that you do, your brother is the person who destroys. You ever notice that destruction happens a lot quicker than building? Right? We can literally click a button and detonate a bomb that destroys buildings in seconds. You ever see those videos? Happened in Pittsburgh several years ago, didn't it, DP? What did we destroy? What did we destroy in Pittsburgh several years ago? We detonated and destroyed something to build something bigger. Yeah, Three River Stadium. How long did it take? You watched the video. How long did it take to destroy it?
7 seconds.
7 seconds. Right? It's always easier to destroy than it is to build. It's easier we're talking about finance. Next week, Brent's going to talk about debt. It's far easier to accumulate debt than it is to build wealth. destroying things. It's just the way the world works. So the warning is, be very careful not to be slack in your work, because you're a brother to him who destroys. Proverbs 26:13, the sluggard says, there's a lion in the road, there's a lion in the streets. Well, what's this proverb saying? They sound the alarm, right? It's false warnings. They get people riled up. They get people's emotions heightened, and they make people scared in order to do what? To take away from them, to steal, to rob them. You ever notice that any time that there's even a hint of anything that's like a natural disaster or like anything, what happens to prices? Do they go down? Do they help the man who's down? No, prices skyrocket. It's called price gouging, and lots of businesses do it. There's no reason for it. It's not like supply and demand. It's just they do it because they can. So the sluggard does these kinds of things. The lazy person warns people and then rips people off. They find ways to con people. Proverbs 26:16, the sluggard is wiser in his own eyes than 7 men who can answer sensibly. So it's the people who think that they're really smart. They have all the answers. They're the ones who are going to lead the way. I would warn you, be careful. When somebody thinks that they have all the answers and they know everything about everything, that's the person that I'm most hesitant to follow. The wise person works with other people. You have 7 men. It's people working together. They're collaborating. They're working together. They're linking arms. They're talking with each other. They're learning from each other. But the sluggard thinks they're the smartest person in the room. Proverbs 21:25, the desire of the sluggard kills him, for his hands refuse to labor. Eventually, there's this downward spiraling. And we see this with people who are lazy. We see it with people who refuse to go to work. What happens? Their health declines eventually. Their lies catch up to them eventually. And you just start to see them spiral. And it happens really quickly. And then finally, Proverbs 13:11, and I love this, and I want to just kind of spend a couple minutes on this. Wealth gained hastily will dwindle, but whoever gathers little by little will increase it. We will be talking in that class about compound interest and the way that works, both good and bad. Compound interest means that if you take out a loan and you keep adding to that loan and you keep adding to that debt, there's interest that you're paying in addition to the principal. In addition to what you actually borrowed, you're paying principal, and that accumulates quickly. That works against you. That's interest working against you. The flip side to that is, when you're adding money and you're investing that and you're gaining interest, that compound effect builds and builds and builds, and there reaches a point where one day you just look and it explodes and you're like, wow. But you have to add to it little by little, piece by piece. Now, I want to talk about this in kingdom terms, and I want to throw a couple of numbers out there. 150. Does anybody know the significance of that number? 150. There's no context for it, so you're all like, what is 150? 150 is the number of people who the very first well that we raised funds for services every single day in Haiti. 150 people. That's our well in Haiti. That was the very first one that we raised funds for just a few years ago. We've been doing this now since 2020, I think is when we first started raising funds. 2021 is the first well that was drilled in the spring of 2021. So we're talking in 4 years? 4 years of drilling wells, 150, that's that first well, and we look at that and we're like, wow, 150 people every single day have access to clean drinking water. Life-changing drinking water. It literally changes their life. It changes how they go into the community. It changes their ability to be able to work, because now they don't have to travel for miles and miles carrying 5-gallon buckets on their water of filthy water that makes them sick. 150 people's lives changed because of you all, because you worked, because you asked people, because you volunteered, and you helped us raise $7,500 for that first well. So you look at that and you're like, wow, what an accomplishment. Does anybody know the number 7,101? Does that have any significance to anybody? Valinda looked over there. You're getting warmer. That's the number of all of the wells minus one well, because we didn't get the book yet. Mark Hatfield still has it. And so we don't know the number from that well, but taking all of those 6 wells that are on the wall and adding the number of people that each one of those wells services, that number now is over 7,000 people who get water, clean drinking water, every single day because of you. And that number, 7,000, is soon going to turn into 10,000, and that 10,000 will soon turn into 20,000, and that 20,000 will eventually become 100,000, and that number will continue to grow and grow and grow. That's called compounding. That's this proverb put into practice. Wealth gained hastily. Yeah, we want to do this big thing, right? You ever hear people who talk big and never actually do anything? Natalie's like shaking her head at me. I'm a big dreamer. Sometimes I overdream and underperform. But there is no quick way to do this. It's not like we go out and just blink your eyes and snap your fingers and then this just happens. It's little by little, but look how fast this accumulates. In 4 years, church, in 4 years, we were able to provide water for over 7,000 souls across the globe. That's incredible. And if you physically look around a room, I give you permission, you can look around. Look at how few people were able to accomplish that. And I hear it all the time. Oh, well, those little churches, or the little churches will say things like, well, we don't have access to, it must be nice, we don't have access to the funds that those big churches have. And I always come back to this. Every time in my own brain, I come back to these 2 words. So what? So what? You know what we have access to? We may not have access to this big, huge pot of money that the big mega churches have, but you know what we have access to? 2 other words: work ethic. Kingdom work ethic. We go out and we grind and we work, and little by little, piece by piece, dollar by dollar, we're able to accomplish massive things by the power of God. That's incredible. And so I want to encourage you with that message. This is not to point fingers and be like, don't be lazy. This is to say the exact opposite, that God rewards good behavior. God rewards people who work for His kingdom. So I want to encourage us as we prepare in just a few weeks. It's like less than 3 weeks away until our walk for water. I want to encourage you. I want to encourage you to contribute, to give, to ask people, to invite people, let people know, and let's make this happen piece by piece, well by well. We will continue to bless people across this globe through the blessing of God our Father and Jesus Christ. If there's anybody this morning who's not yet taken the step to put Christ on baptism and you're ready, or if you have any prayer needs, we'd encourage you to come up as we all stand and sing a song together. DP?